we are actually going through these Agentic AI Foundation masterclass. To give a bit of context, so within the community and I guess in the industry as a whole, you might have noticed how many tools are out there, right? And how much tools sort of come out every week. So it's been sort of my agenda for a while to develop this sort of masterclass and one foundational course so that no matter what tool comes out, let's say this week or next week, as is usual with AI, we get a bit more foundational knowledge so that whatever it is that comes out, we can tie it up to a mental model that I think is quite present for already. If you've been using agentic AI platforms a lot, then you may have already heard of a lot of these terms. But I think if you're coming into this new, it's easy to get intimidated by the open clause or the Hermes or the Claude codes of the world, right? So that is what we'll be diving into for this session. Um, Also keen to make it interactive, so obviously we'll be uploading this for those who can't join in the call, and we'll be putting this up in the classroom. Um, and if in case you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. I think we have a pretty small group for today's time anyway, so we can probably pause for a few questions later on, especially if you guys have any particular Q&As, any particular questions, or any, let's say, topics that you want to bring up. Because I think this week, I mean, as usual, but this week in particular, there's been a lot of releases with like GPT Image 2, obviously Opus 4.7 just released, and it seems like a while ago, but it's only like a few days ago that these things have released, and it is just rolling and developing up as we go. But I think it's always good to put the foundations in place is the core of this particular session. Um, so yeah, so let me just sort of set the stage a bit, because I think with this one, like what I was saying, if you have the mental model that I think all of us is going to benefit from, if we have this sort of articulated pretty well, then a lot of the tools which are always coming out that are pretty new, all these models that come out, they sort of sort themselves out, at least in our psyche, in our sort of mental capacity. Where before, if you feel like with every new launch and every week there's like a new thing that's happening with Claude Code or Codex or Antigravity and all these tools that all of these different model and AI providers are coming out with, they can be intimidating. But if you have, let's say, this mental model, then you'll be able to just absorb this and put that in that same framework, which I think is really important. So this is that course, this is that masterclass. And if you get this right once, then every new tool will just click. But if you get it wrong, and if you don't have that sort of foundations in place, then you'll have that. You probably have heard of this, that shiny object syndrome. That whole thing will be sort of the story of your AI journey, which is what I don't want for each of you guys. So, like I mentioned, this masterclass will keep it really light, and also keep it interactive. I'll pause in several parts, but it will also exist in several sessions from here on out. So probably in the next week we'll cover module 2 and module 3. But just to give a quick overview of what I hope to cover in this whole thing, I want to give you guys a background of what AI agents are really, what the mental model behind it is, what are the components, and how to make them smarter. So when I did the poll in the community, I think that's one of the things that a lot of people actually want to understand. And number 3 is the language of agents. So when we're talking about, let's say, skills, context windows, tools, MCPs, and which of those are actually worth learning and which are just a distraction at this point, since things change a lot, then we'll cover those as well. And I think there's a lot of core techniques that people in the space have sort of landed on, which if you know these, let's say 3 to 5 core techniques, then you'll be able to really upgrade how you use these agents. And then we'll walk through some more advanced setup later down the line, such as how you actually work with multiple agents at a time, and how do you actually context switch if you're trying to run, let's say, multiple sessions without losing your mind. So those are some of the things that I wanted to cover. And finally, I think this command center concept, which was popularized by OpenClaw, but I think is still applicable no matter what harness, no matter what agentic platform you use, is also good to cover. So there, so quite meaty. Hopefully, it's valuable to everyone watching this, to you guys as well. The other thing that I wanted to mention is I think this is a good complement to the Agents as a Service course because my ambition has always been for our community and for a lot of our educational materials to not just cover the technical side, which is a lot of these things that we're going to cover today, but also the business side. So, yes, you know the theory, you know how agents work. You can even articulate it to people after this whole masterclass is over. But how do you actually make money out of it? So that's the Agents as a Service course, which we just also released in the community. So I think these two paired together is going to sort of level up how you use AI and how you actually practically use AI in day to day life, in your business, and to improve your work. So that is the ambition. I'll just go through this quickly, just to keep it in the recording in case there are people who are new to the community. I mentioned this anyway in a lot of the videos, which probably are one of the first things that you found out Robo Nuggets from or Robo Labs from. But yeah, the opportunity that was able to be given over the past years, I guess, was able to contribute to my knowledge in this space. Back then, when I first did my master's in data science, so I took it in Sydney. Back then, the sort of buzzword was big data. So I'm not sure how many of you guys were in that space before, but AI was sort of just evolving that space. But that's basically how I got started when I took my master's here in University of Technology in Sydney. And then from then, I did my agency now, which is RoboLabs, where we come up with a lot of tech solutions, in-person trainings. Which, by the way, this whole thing is the reason why I have beautiful slides now is because we will actually do these as in-person trainings here in Sydney. So you guys are getting the early preview and also the sort of online version. But I guess if people are in Sydney are watching who also are interested in these sort of in-person trainings, then that's something that we have started to offer as well in the RoboLabs group. And then obviously, so I mentioned this in the video as well. Had the opportunity to work with several brands before in my career. So just mention a few of these. So consumer goods like Unilever and P&G have been quite a an interesting sort of client base to work with. And in tech, Microsoft HelloFresh, which I think is big in US, Sydney, and in Germany as well. So that is just sort of a quick overview, if in case that matters to you. Okay, so let's dive into it. So I think a couple of things that we will be covering in this sort of part of the lesson. Like I mentioned, we'll cover what AI agents are, but later on we'll shift quickly to the components of AI agents and why does it matter even to understand how this is foundationally. And then what we'll do is after I go through these sort of components and these clear definitions, hopefully you also pick up some nuggets on how to simply explain them to people. Because obviously if you're sort of working with your clients or maybe in your own workspace in your company, and if you're like the AI guy, then what's mostly appreciated within these enterprises I've found is if you can clearly articulate things that anyone can understand. Like if you start talking in JSON formats or HTML or what have you, then quickly you lose a lot of people. But if you're able to explain it up and manage up, let's say, to stakeholders or even to clients who have never even heard of Claude, they only know ChatGPT probably, or even Google, then you'll be able to have that leg up with explaining things. So that's just a call out because I think that's a clear skill that as you listen to how we speak about these things, you'll be able to pick up those phrases as well, which is always going to be valuable in whatever shape or form. But just to mention it, I think the clearest way to explain agents to people, because when people think of AI, they usually think of ChatGPT, right? And in my view, you can just say ChatGPT are simply just chatbots. And the clear difference between the two is clearly just simply explained as follows. So even though they look alike, they actually don't behave alike. So if you just talk to like a chatbot, what's good is they explain things for you. They can even research things for you, right? But it's just a sort of a back and forth of you asking and them responding. But when you talk about agents, which are the next frontier that is becoming bigger and bigger this year, and more so next year, they actually just don't explain things for you. They also do and build things out for you. So they take actions. They call tools, which are tools that we use in our day-to-day work, like the software that we have been using for the past, and also not just read files but also write files for us. So I'll go through more in depth on why this is important in a bit, but I think that's just a nice sort of clear distinction between the two. But I think the bigger question is, how really do they actually work, right? Because one of the, I think, key, let's say, confusion points when it comes to agents is that maybe the first time that you've heard of agents, you first heard of it when OpenClaw became a thing. That apparently now you can have like an agent added to your Telegram chat or your Slack chat or your Discord chat. But under the hood, OpenClaw and Claude Code and Anti Gravity, they're actually mostly the same, and you can sort of break them down into this anatomy of three specific elements, which I'll go through. One is the model, the next is the harness, and the third is the context. So obviously, if you want to be a bit more detailed, there's probably more beyond that, which we'll cover in like the more advanced lessons. But if you were to boil it down to just three, then it's always, almost always, these three. So just to go through each of them. So the model, which is probably the one that we're most familiar with, because we already know about Opus or GPT 5.4 or Gemini. Like if you're new into AI, these are probably the first sort of names and terms that you hear, right? But one of the sort of clearest definitions or mental models that I've heard describing these models is that you can actually think of them like a zip file. And this is actually coming from Andrej Karpathy. So he did this sort of 3 hour back when ChatGPT first launched, I think 2023, 2022 is when he uploaded this sort of 3 hour video where he described these models as sort of like ultra compressed zip files. And if it's like a model from, let's say, Anthropic, then it's a zip file that's living somewhere in the computer of Anthropic. So Dario probably has a server with that model in there. But if it's an open source model, what that simply means is that this zip file is shared online. But I think the reason why this sort of analogy works is because if you think about all of the world's information, basically what they did is just compress the whole thing. Like really, they're really efficient ultra compressors of knowledge, and they also made it have like a capability in a front end. Let's say if you go to chatgpt.com or Claude.ai, then you'll essentially have that front end interface where if you ask a question, it taps into this model under the hood, and then it gives you an answer based on this zip file that it ultra compressed the information for you. So that's all there is, right? So obviously under the hood there's much more to it, which we won't go into. Like you can research all about the sort of magic about tech token prediction and how these models work under the hood. And even goes back in 2017 if you want to read more about it. The whole transformers paper by Google is what kicked off this whole thing, and obviously ChatGPT brought it to sort of the consciousness of every individual almost on earth and those who are dealing with tech. But if you want to sort of simplify it, basically a model is just a zip file. And the newer and newer models that we are getting are basically zip files that are a bit more better, more efficient in compression, and also more updated. Obviously, there's more nuance to it, which we'll go through. But just to finish off the definitions of these last two remaining elements, the more recent thing that I think unlocked these agents for people is the harness. And if you think about the harness, what is pretty interesting about this terminology that people adopted is if you think about, let's say, the models themselves as the one that contains the power, sort of the horsepower. The harness is the one that sort of steers this power into whatever it is that you need things to be done, right? So for example, if you are dealing with Opus, Claude Code is actually a harness for this model. So what it is basically sometimes earlier it was called like a wrapper, but the more sort of exact definition of it is it's a core system instruction or sometimes a front end that allows you to use this model more effectively. So that's all it really is, and that's why in terms of giving an example here, I also included it's a this model for Nano Banana, which is an image model. You can think of Higgsfield Cinema Studio, which is what they launched recently, around which is a harness for Nano Banana. Basically, it lets you use Nano Banana in much more efficient ways and in ways that are not given by sort of the vanilla model, right? But all it is really under the hood is all just system instructions. As you dive deeper more into the space, you'll start to realize that a lot of these are all just text, honestly. So if Claude Code is a wrapper for Opus, it is basically using Opus as a sort of driver for whatever it is that it needs to do. And we'll dive more into this in a bit. And Higgsfield Cinema Studio basically is the harness for Nano Banana Pro. So what is interesting about the harness is that you can actually, in a way, inspect what it looks like. So if I were to give a quick example, so if you provide, let's say, this prompt to any harness that you're using, whether it's Cloud Code or whether it's anti-gravity or even if it's Codex, so you can actually give this brief to, let's say, your agent. So I just ask it to visualize the system instructions pre-injected for me. And note, this is like a new session for Claude Code, right? So I never interacted with it, but it's able to actually give me a view of what comes as pre-injected even prior to me talking to it. So what is important to realize here is that every session that you start with a harness, because it is already, coming with pre-injected system instructions, it actually already has these system prompts built in that is hidden from you, but it's there. So for example, it has this base identity where it has this security posture prompt, tone rules, end of turn limits for Claude Code. And a lot of this, by the way, is confidential. Like I think there's like a Claude, so there's a Claude Code leak that happened a couple of days ago. So you can probably inspect what the system instructions are in there. But under the hood, like these are just texts that someone at Atropic basically coded or typed in order to steer this model, like whatever it is that we are using, towards how Claude Code appears to us now. And then there's multiple layers here, which will go into more detail. But I think what's important to realize is that when you talk about like a harness, it's just system instructions. It's literally just English that is baked into the models themselves whenever you interact with them. So that's basically what the harness is. And finally, just to complete the picture, and then we can probably pause there before we dive deeper. The context, I think, is incredibly important because if you download Cloud Code, that gives you the model, that gives you the harness, but the context is what you can actually tweak, right? So this is your personal context. These are the tools that you're using. But by the end of the day, it's all just text files as well. So for Claude Code, there is this claude.md, which we'll dive into more in a bit. And that's just a markdown file. So MD stands for a markdown file. And what that is essentially is just a text file that has like proper formatting. For anti-gravity or OpenClaw, if you're using those, you have an agents.md, which provides the core system instructions for your particular context. And for OpenClaw in particular, what I think they've done a bit differently is that they expanded upon this and also included, let's say, a user.md, which contains instructions on who you are as a user. And they even included some custom ones like a heartbeat.md that has like a scheduled task where, let's say, for OpenClaw, by default, I think it runs every 30 minutes, wakes itself up, and actually looks at heartbeat.md and checks whatever is in there. So by the end of the day, it's all just context. It's all just things that you can amend. And for each of these, like literally, if you open them up, they're all just text files. Like literally, they're all just in English, and they are fully editable by you. And I think this is like a good sub note and is a good tweet that I think is what Karpati has still pinned on his X account, where he said that the hottest new programming language is English. It is how, with a lot of coding development work, the reason why a lot of people are shipping more in GitHub, are shipping more with these tools. And in fact, this whole thing, this whole HTML sort of slide deck that I made, is all just written or coded with me talking to my agents in English. So that is a lot of sort of the basics that you would get under the hood with these agents. But what's great about it is if you think about this whole paradigm in this way, where if you think about AI agents and you have, let's say, OpenClaw version 3 coming out next week or Hermes version 2 coming out the month after, by the end of it, it's all just a model that sits underneath it with these open source, with these open harnesses. You can choose the model, right? But with things like Claude Code, obviously that is an Anthropic product, but they will always have a harness, which always is just system instructions that come shipped out of the box with whatever the sort of provider is giving you, and the context, which are the stuff that you can edit on your own. So I think having that sort of paradigm is like a good sort of ammunition to have in order to not always be intimidated whenever there's like a new thing that comes out. So that's it. Honestly, it's very basic in terms of the elements. The rest of these is probably a bit more advanced. I think a lot of you guys probably have heard of these three anyway. But for the next part, I'll be going through some tips and a few ways by which I mainly optimize for those three same parts and elements. But let me stop talking first there because I've been speaking for a while. Is there any question from the team? Let me find this. Good morning from Istanbul. Yes, Mohammed, morning. Um, yeah, exactly. So, Ricardo, what you mentioned is exactly what I said. And I might adjust this because the light from my side is pretty wild. Let's fix that in a bit. But yeah, so model is the horse, the harness is the reins that control the horse. Um, exactly. So, I'll actually go into this more in a bit. So Ricardo was saying how minimally I think of the harness. I thought the focus has started to shift to the harness itself as being an important part of the equation. That's exactly right. So what one of the things that I'll go through in a bit is that when you think about these models, you actually have like a plus minus 5% differential between Gemini versus let's say ChatGPT on some of the design aspects or some of the coding capabilities, maybe more depending on which model you're referring to. But I think what makes it or breaks it is the harness that you are using, at least for like 90+% of people. So that's exactly right. um and yeah, Don, question about memory and context. Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to unmute yourself, Don? Happy to go into it.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been using the rubric quite a bit. It was a really good kickstart into um, kind of building my own OS, I guess. And I moved it to VPS on Hostinger so that it could always be on. And because I'm doing like a lot of like coding on my computer, which is killing my resources. So I moved anyways the OS to the VPS so agents could just run in the background. And so there are some pretty cool things that you can do on the VPS, like PM2 restarts to get the agents, constantly running through terminal. And I'm happy to share my screen if it helps paint the picture, because I'm not sure how well I can articulate some of this without, the show and tell. But um, I'm trying to find out, like with the cron setup. Um, Originally, I used the when the agents are turned on, their auto start, one of their steps is to go look at the cron, which I think this is kind of the method you were using on the desktop, is to look at like the cron registry and then go recreate the crons on start, and then you have them. But for some reason, they were not executing them. They're slipping through the cracks, and I couldn't figure out why. So I moved the kind of cron activity outside of the agent startup, and so the crons happen now. There's still the cron registry, but the crons are actually happening kind of outside of the agent activity. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I'm still on the agent like upstart
Yeah. Yeah, are you
memory
using
and everything's happening. Hmm?
yeah, remind me, Don, you're using Claude Code? Is that what you were describing?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
got it.
So
That's
it. Mhm.
pretty much same setup as mine. Yeah, so I think with the cron registry that I shared before, the thing with Claude Code is that they recently just released this thing called routines, which it has now built in. It was only available for like, well, when was it launched? Like probably last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. Can't keep track. But one of the things that I found is I actually started to port my cron registry into routines. That way, number one, I see it in Claude Desktop what the specific routines are, and number two, it's a bit more what do you call that? Like built in by
It's
Anthropic, and so
more
there's a bit
reliable.
more reliability baked
Yeah.
in. I'm still testing it out because one of the things that I think routines doesn't allow is, let's say I want the routine to, like, I have this daily cron that gives me like AI news sent to Telegram, so that if I go out to walk, it'll be delivered to Telegram. I think because it is a routine that fires from within, like a separate session, is how basically it works. It spins up like a new session. If I talk back to it within that same Telegram chat, it actually didn't know that it fired like a cron. So I'm still sort of playing around with it to see which one is better. I think if you have like a specific sort of bug or issue, one of the best ways that I found to assess it is to specifically ask Claude Code to troubleshoot it, especially by the end of the sort of week where your rate limits are about to reset. Like I just put everything on max and use up all the rate limits before they reset. And then that way, because each of us, by the what I was said before was a lot of us now have unique setups with these agents, and so it might be different how it works under the hood. But overall, it should be the same. Like how I run it now is still that cron registry, but I did want to just mention that routines factor for Claude Desktop, which is now, I guess, a bit more reliable. If you're having still issues with the cron registry, because Anthropic was the one who shipped that one.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
maybe we
I'm
can,
very mhm.
yeah, we can probably dive into it more in one of the ask and advice sessions. So maybe I think this weekend I'll be able to dive into there and we can do the screen share uh, if you're still having trouble.
Yeah, it'd be awesome to see it because I have, with Claude built a workaround. I don't know what I don't know with the workaround right now.
Yeah,
So I've got
exactly.
so, like, Telegram chat, like you said, there's the Telegram chat, and then for the crons now, I've set them up so that they're system run, so they
Yeah,
happen with 2 different sets of context. They both have the same startup routines, but, like, whatever the cron does, like you just mentioned, is different than the whatever
yeah,
chat conversation I'm having. So the
yeah,
way I solved it is I created this shared notebook for persistent memory layer so that as a cron goes through, it updates that central memory layer brain piece, and the agent I'm talking to via Telegram chat reads that and knows what the cron did, and vice versa.
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
how I've solved it right now, but I don't know if that's like the best way to solve it. And yeah, I'm curious to what you find.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, I think probably my directional sort of advice is to see if routines would work for you.
Okay,
You could probably just ask Claude Code to research. Usually, how my workflow is now is new idea, ask Claude Code to research it for me, and then see how it applies to my setup. And I'll probably go into this more because I think that
cool.
whole case about persistent memory and shared sort of context, there's a lot to unpack there, especially since context switching seems to be sort of the skill of the century. So I'll go into that further and also answer some of the questions on the chat. I think we'll cover them in this sort of next part. But yeah, so I think to some of the points earlier, we were sort of just defining what are the elements just to sort of have that frame of mind when it comes to these agents, what they are exactly under the hood. And it's all just the model, the harness, and your own personal context. Now, if you were to dive deeper into this, I think there's a few sort of good either tips or techniques or insights that I think a lot of people have found, and I personally have found to be really good sort of principles to do as well. And starting with the model, I think one of the things that I think you should always work towards is to think about you using the model that will be available 6 months from now. And the reason why I say that is if you think that, let's say, Opus 4.7 is not good at a particular task, almost always you can expect that if that particular task can be done in some way, or you can tweak the model or prompt your way towards like a good output, then you can probably expect that the model can do that 6 months from now. And so if you're planning 6 months from now for your particular business or your application, then this is a good sort of mental model or principle to have. Same thing with video models, right? Like I remember like one of the first video and image models I was using back in 2023 is DALI Stable Diffusion, right? And back then, you can sort of string together images to form videos, and it was really bad. Like it looked like a stop motion with all the 24 frames per second being stitched together. But now look at C Dance, right? So I think the good principle to have is if it can do it kind of well, then it can probably do it more and much better and probably hit it in a single prompt 6 months or a year from now. And it's the same thing with GPT image too, right? Like I think one of the things that a lot of people are observing with this new image model by OpenAI is that before you need to craft like super complex JSON structured prompts in order to get like really good image output. But now you just talk to it in like one sentence and it gives you like a really good output, right? So That is the case. That was the case, and is probably going to be the case for a lot of these models still. Also, there's this concept of spikiness, which I think is sort of related. And if you think about these models as sort of having attributes put on a radar chart like this, where you have like points for how good they are in terms of UI or code or math, if they are really good now at code and math, then that is good. But you might notice that, okay, let's say on video, it is not yet that good. I think there will come a point in time where this whole sort of interface or this whole region will be covered, where if humans can do it this well to have 100% of this filled up, then at some certain point then it will exceed that as well. So just a pretty interesting concept to absorb that is related to that principle. And then I think the other thing that a lot of people might be misled against, because it seems like with the AI models, one of the things that I heard why it is sometimes difficult to run like an AI model company. Like for example, if you think about Elon running X with Grok, the reason why X is not as sort of exceeding in terms of expectations versus tools like Anthropic or OpenAI is because with AI models, there's actually a lot of sort of benchmark optimization that is happening, but sometimes it is not always deterministic that they are actually good based on just the benchmarks. So versus before with previous software where you can actually run software and see if it does things or not, with these AI models they usually call them sort of black boxes in a sense, because even though the technology has been birthed, even though Opus 4.7 has been launched, a lot of the new capabilities actually get unlocked as you sort of interact and as you test them out. And so, with a lot of these benchmarks, just know that they may not be your reality. And even though it is exceeding on a lot of benchmarks, because this is mostly researcher focused, because there are already incidents of models before where people seem to think that there's just an optimization against these benchmarks. In the real world, one of the best ways for you to find out which model works best for you is simply just to test it. However, this is what Ricardo was saying earlier. I think with a lot of these models now, before when we were saying that, let's say, Gemini was really good in design and Opus 4.7, Opus 4.6, maybe not so much. I think that's like a minus 5% increment, right? And if you have like a good harness, if you have like a good prompt or like a proper sort of direction to your agent or your AI model, then you can actually bridge that gap pretty easily. So I think that's the good way to understand these things. And versus you having to sort of always have to decide which model is going to work best for you for your use case. Often it's almost always better to just master the harness and master the art of giving direction, and you'll be able to just quickly get to that point where Opus is just as good in design as Gemini. And given that point earlier, around like a few months from now, it'll probably be sort of equal or probably only marginally better in some things versus what it is. So I think those are just good sort of mental models to have. And obviously, this is a list that if you're viewing this maybe a month from now, it's probably going to change, right? But always with these providers, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, what we have landed on as a sort of industry is there's always like a high tier of a model. So for Anthropic, I think part of the reason why they actually became really popular recently is because of how good they structured and named their models. So Opus is the highest, Sonnet is the mid, and Haiku is the lowest. Unfortunately for OpenAI, it is not as clear. Like they named their new image model as GPT Image 2, right? So not very marketable, unfortunately. But yeah, basically they have like a pro model, like the default one and the mini one. And then for Google, it's all just Gemini. And then obviously they have the Gemma models, which are more of the open source. But I think instead of sort of giving a lot of time thinking about which model to use, like I said, it's and probably a lot of you have observed, it's mostly the harness and you using your context and setting up your context properly that makes or breaks how you use your AI agent. But obviously, if we were to sort of go into the foundations, then we need to talk about tokens a bit. And as a general rule, obviously, if you have a higher tier, like Opus GPT 5.4 Pro, then there will be more tokens that will be consumed. Now, if you think about tokens and if you're really new to the space, what are even tokens, right? And tokens, at least for our purposes, the sort of layman definition or description you can give to it is just the number of characters that these models output. It is not as well defined because each token is different, but the 4 characters per token, like 4 letters per token, is generally the good rule of thumb. If you were to imagine it, I think I mentioned this in some of our earlier lessons, where if you have like the Christian Bible, the number of words in the Christian Bible is roughly 750,000. So that's almost exactly 1 million tokens in length, actually, which is just a sort of nice visual where if you see, let's say, a million tokens that you consume today, then that means the whole conversation with your agent, including all the system prompts, including all the thinking that it has done, actually equates to a conversation as long as the Christian Bible. Um, Harry Potter books, like all 7 books back to back, that's roughly around 1.5 million tokens. So those are just sort of nice ways for you to visualize how these things translate in real life. And then the other thing that is, I guess, foundational for people to understand is the context window. So generally, now it's becoming a bit more flattened in the 1 million context window tier. But if you are dealing with Opus, for example, that has a 1 million token context window. So what that basically means, simply defined, is that is essentially how much your specific model can remember in one go. So let's say you have a session that has the context window filled up to the brim with 1 million tokens. That basically means that that whole session is already like a Bible length conversation. And what is great about these models is that they can actually remember and keep that in context or keep that in their memory, that whole 1 million token context. So that is just sort of a nice way to think about these things and to simply define them, I think, which is foundational to everything. Um, cool. Now I'll just quickly go through the harness because I think this is probably the one that is most essential for a lot of people. And if you were to sort of phrase this, if the model is the one that does the thinking, then the harness is the one that does the acting. And there's multiple ways to use a harness, right? And this actually arose only a couple of months ago, probably when Claude Code popularized this, right? So you have a terminal view, which is basically you opening up the terminal. For example, for Claude, if you type in Claude to your terminal, for example, if open a new one here and type in Claude, then that will allow me to use Claude Code here, which is the harness. Now, I think only a lot of developers use it this way, but for a lot of people who are getting into this not from a developer background, that is probably not what people use. The most approachable for people is probably the desktop app. So if you download the Codex desktop app or the Claude.ai slash downloads, if you go there, you'll be able to download each of their desktop apps. But I think for Claude in particular, like the reason why I don't often use the desktop app like this one is because I feel like sometimes it's incomplete because there is no native way or easy way for me to view the files here actually. So yes, you'll be able to connect with Claude Code in here. You'll be able to use Claude Cowork, which are pretty much almost the same thing instead, but it's just a bit more sort of more layman and non-technical. But if you're using these agentic platforms, one of the things that I found is the sweet spot of the IDE, which is an integrated development environment. Um, so just to show how it is on my space, basically I'm using Antigravity as my IDE, and I just install Claude Code in here as an extension. And the way you do that, in case you're completely new, is you just look for the Claude Code extension in here and install that. And you'll be able to not just talk to Claude Code in here, but also have this view where you're able to view your sessions that you are doing, as well as review the files here, review the skills, and so on. So it's just, in my view, a much nicer way to interface with these agents. The other thing that is good is if you need like a terminal interface within an IDE, it is also possible. And so this is sort of a sweet spot between a lot of things. Now, I think depending on when you're watching this, I think a lot of in the future we might have like an IDE that is custom for agents. I think I mentioned before that Cursor 3.0, that is no longer a fork of VS Code, which is this IDE that has been there by Microsoft and is open source for a while. And this may evolve, but I think that as things evolve, this IDE will probably be what most people will be using. And probably a lot of these, a lot of you guys are using IDEs as well. I think what's new is that with the advent of OpenClaw, you can add these agents to messaging apps, which is probably a topic for another discussion, but that is something that you see, right? But under the hood, it's the same thing. Like if you install OpenClaw, you can actually, before when I was using OpenClaw, I was still using an IDE and I was just doing a remote connection to my OpenClaw sort of setup, my computer in the VPS, in the virtual private server, which is a computer in the cloud. And then I'm still able to look at the files there, which just points you to the fact that whether it's OpenClaw or Hermes or what have you, then it's all just files down the line. It's mostly just markdown and text files. So yeah, so that's just a peek. I think this is very personal and depends on what it is that you prefer. But I think what I've landed on, having tested all of these apps in my own time, is that this combination of an IDE plus the extension for Claude Code, and because you can actually also use Codex as an extension from within an IDE like Antigravity, then that gives you enough flexibility to switch between these pretty easily. And yeah, like I mentioned, OpenClaw is a different shape. I'll probably link for those if you're watching the recording. There's like a whole rundown that I did for OpenClaw with all of the sort of complex and different things that introduced apart from the basic claw.mds and agents.mds. And then finally, before we leave the harness, I think this is more of a not a must know, but it's just a nice to know of how these agents work under the hood. I think these are more like these are the concept of the agentic loop. Once you start interfacing with agents, it is not the most practical thing for you to understand, but I think it's actually still conceptual and foundational for everyone to at least encounter, because this is actually what makes harnesses really good, right? Because it is what every good harness has built in. And essentially, whenever you talk to an agent like Claude Code or in Antigravity, actually, let me roll back. If you talk to ChatGPT, for example, mostly if you send a chat, it responds back to you. That is not actually a loop. That's just it looking into like its database, that zip file we talked about earlier. Maybe it goes to the internet to grab information for you. If you have it connected to some tools, maybe it connects to those tools and gives you the information back. But the reason why agents are the way they are and the reason why they can act is because it has this loop where it looks at what the current state is, it plans or thinks about what the next move is, it does that, and then the loop comes here in step 4 and step 5, where it actually checks it work, where it checks if it works and repeats that with new information each time. So this might be something that you see, right? Because if you have like a session or a complex task for Claude Code, for example, then you might notice that, oh, it's been running for like 5 minutes and it's still going. And the reason why that is because it is actually doing this loop where it is doing an action, it's checking if it's achieved the objective, and then if not yet, then it goes back and essentially just talks to itself until it gets to that definition of done that you have set for it. So, for example, if you ask it to fix a particular bug, then what it will do in the first loop is it will read the error, it will open the test file, and then it will see that test, spot the bug, and then run the test. But amongst all of that, the common thread is that it always does this thinking, it always does this checking, and it repeats that up until it is confident that it has achieved your definition of done. So again, that's just a sort of a nice conceptual way to think about it. But in terms of real practice, you'll just see it work under the hood anyway, which is why I think the most actionable step for you to take is this piece around context. So if we are to do a quick recap, if if the model is the one that does the thinking, if the harness is the one that does the acting, then context is the one that does the personalizing for your particular use case. And so again, just to make this as non-intimidating as I can, once you start working with these agents, you'll realize that it's just all English. It's just all markdowns all the way down. Especially if you've never sort of coded in your life and you see Claude Code's name, it has that code name in there, then you may realize that, oh, it might be for developers actually. But the new paradigm now is that when you sort of unfurl the sort of files within these Claude Code interfaces, you'll realize that it's all just written in English, which is good for us who have not mastered a lot of these coding languages. And the other thing that is a good principle is that when you talk about Claude.mds, these memory.mds, and all of these skills, you almost never write these yourself. So the reason why a lot of the files that I will probably show in a bit is sort of also new to me in a sense. Like if I think about that whole structure in my file cabinet, it is actually as abstract or obfuscated to me as it is because I just talk to my agents and I have them write these skills myself. So a lot of the resources that you see in the community, I actually don't inspect them line by line. And the reason why is because if the intention is achieved and I see that the output is already giving us good output, then I'm reasonably confident. Obviously, doing some sensitivity checks and making sure that there's no inconsistent information in there, then I'm reasonably confident that that particular skill is already good to ship, right? And so that sort of mindset of almost never writing these yourself, I think, is quite important. But if you were to sort of dissect the context a bit more, just so that we can talk about it in a bit more structured fashion, I think there's three parts to it that are most essential now. That if you basically get these three parts right, then you'll be able to just 10x how you work with your AI agents, no matter what it is, whether it's OpenClaw or Antigravity or Claude Code. The first one is the identity. So Claude calls this the Claude.md. Antigravity and OpenClaw calls this their agent.md. And then the next one is skills, and the next one is memory. So I'll just go through each of these so that we have like the um, background against them. But yeah, actually, before we go into them, let me just check the time. Yeah, I think we can accommodate more questions by the end of these three parts. Yeah, cool. So let me just proceed to it so that we can get to the end and then I can stay for more questions. I think the Claw.md, basically, if you were to think of this, it is essentially the handbook, right? So it's your agent's identity and rules. So if you go back to that sort of system instructions that we were looking at before, like every time you open up a session with your agent, whether it's Cloud Code or Antigravity, there will always be a portion here where it pre-injects itself with this Claude.md or agent.md if you're using Antigravity. Now, if I go to my Claude.md, it is once again like it is probably one of the few times that I inspect this myself, right? But if I go to this, it's a pretty long file that I didn't write myself. Like I just had Claude write this for me. And then I just tweak it every time. Like every time I talk to my Claude code, I just ask it to update Claude.md for any learnings for this particular session. I can probably share like the structure of this if needed. I think this is obviously very different versus everyone. You can just find this in whatever workspace that you're working on with your agent. But one of the key things that I included here, you can see, is this sort of structure, just so that we can keep it clean in terms of how the folders are structured in your workspace. But what's key about this Claw.md is that you actually have it pre-injected into every session. And so it's one of the highest value things that you can have your agent clean up and optimize for you. Now, but that's basically what it is, right? It's essentially like an employee handbook. Like if you were onboarding a new agent, onboarding a new employee, then Claude.md or agents.md is simply that handbook. Same thing with skills. Like if you think about the skills that you onboard your agent with, you can think of this as sort of like instruction manual recipe cards, right? And if you think about the skills that I have here on my workspace, I go back here again, I probably won't be able to tell you how many skills that I have or what are the particular skills here, or the contents of these skills are. But what's common among them is if you go to each one, the structure of it is pretty much the same, where you have this portion at the top. And again, this is all just English, like you can read it through, but this portion at the top with the description, that is actually what each of your agents have context on every session. So when you, let's say, talk to a particular agent like Claude Code, then this description is also preloaded into that chat, so that if you, let's say, want to use this skill called Calibrate, then it'll be able to read through this description and decide on its own whether it needs to use this skill or not. And then when it decides to use this skill, it will basically read through this whole plain English markdown file just to understand what the steps are. And that's basically it, right? So again, this is all just markdown files. The reason why, like, I have all these skills is because a core component of how you make these agents smarter is you actually just constantly create skills. Actually, like, you just ask for every session, you just ask it to create a skill for you. And then if you ever need to clean up, which in at least in my heavy usage of these agent platforms, since I haven't found that requirement yet to do like a major cleanup for all of them. But all they are basically is just text files where it provides an instruction to your agent on how to do a specific thing. And then lastly is the memory. So if skills are sort of the instruction manuals that are like recipe cards, then the memory is sort of like a journal or a notebook that your agent writes to. Now, this varies per agent. I think amongst all of the components of context, this is the one that varies a lot depending on the harness that you are using. But generally, how it works is, again, this is all just text files, right? If you go to your shared tab, I think this is where I have my memory. So I have a lot here because, again, our sort of setups are all quite different. But I think what's common among them is this memory.md, where if you look at that, that basically is sort of like a directory, at least for Cloud Code. That's how they do it, where it has this sort of bullet points on what these markdown files are and what they represent. So that if your agent wants to understand which particular thing it needs to look for, then it just looks at this directory and goes to those specific markdown files in order to understand, let's say, what my time zone is, or what my financials are, or what my content ideas are. And it stores that into this memory.md. So what's common among them is all of that is just text files, right? So when you think of all of these components, like, all of them are pretty much just text files under the hood. And so with that layer of thinking, you're pretty much almost 90% there in terms of making sure the playing field is leveled so that you are not as intimidated against these coding agents as you would have before this session. So I'll probably reserve these sort of tips for the next session, because I think we might not have a lot of time, or maybe we can go through them in a bit. But I did want to go through some of the questions that you guys have over at the chat. Uh, cool. Cool. All right. So I think some of the ones that I wasn't able to go through these yet. Um, yeah, so I think Max Senz's point on anti-gravity here has been quite the talk of the town, at least in terms of the usership for anti-gravity. So if you go to the anti-gravity subreddit, that is actually where a lot of the noise is coming from. And from my experience as well, the reason why I switched to Claude Code is because of that agent terminated due to an error message that keeps on popping up, unfortunately. And so I think Google needs to step up. I think they're still very much in the game within these harnesses and agentic platforms. But unfortunately, with anti gravity in particular, or their default agents to be more specific, not the sort of IDE structure, it is quite unreliable. And there's not much that we can do, unfortunately, because it's on the harness level, which is the reason why it's failing. Cursor, I've played around with it a couple of times, but not, I think, to the extent that you have, maybe Christopher. So it's been there for a while. It's one of the first ones. I think one of the key things that people are thinking about when it comes to Cursor versus Claude Code is just the sort of what do you call that? Like the differentiating factor or the competitive moat that they would have against the sort of base models. But I think it is very much a viable piece. Um, and yeah, so Ricardo was saying Gemma 4, some benchmarks. Yeah, exactly. So it is um, like a sort of a misnomer sometimes if you look at benchmarks versus just testing it out yourself. Is what's happening in my view. Um, there, we might have actually time to finish off with some of these tips because I think these are quite important. But before that, any questions from anyone that you guys want to take the mic on before I can probably extend in order. I don't have anything after this. Cool. Oh yeah, Don has a question. You have Claude and memory shared in main folder and then again under the agents. Sure. All right, that is a perfect sort of segue into the next few slides. So I think one of the things that I sort of found is a common question with these things is there's a different paradigm, right? Because before, if you think about your operating systems with Windows and your Mac, especially for us millennials and even before, like you used to think of these sort of files as you need to organize your folder like this visual interface with the folders. I need it to be clean. I have stuff in documents, I have stuff in downloads. So I think we're defaulting to that same mindset with regard to these skills and these memory files. And so one of the most common questions that I found myself asking and also a couple of people in the community asking is, hey, where do I actually put my skills and how do I actually sort of organize them? And what I found is I actually don't organize them any longer. And the reason why that is because since these are all just text files, essentially what I found is these models are so good at finding things for me. And let's say if I have like a skill that I want them to use, sometimes I just describe it and they're able to get it. The sort of key thing that I do in order to make sure that I have my own context sort of fixed so that I understand what skills are the ones that I use the most is I just gave them a naming convention. So, for example, if I go to my skills here, like there's so many skills here that I sort of vaguely remember is useful to me. But if I go to this set of master skills, I know that master builds is what I use to sort of package things so that I can ship them to the community so that they are useful. It does the check, it does the sensitivity check that I used to do manually with N8N. I have this master coordination skill, which is pretty good. I'll probably talk this more. I'll talk through this more when it comes to the multi-agent orchestration, because sometimes I find that Cloud Code session one is still working on this sort of content piece. Let me start a new session and a new project. Maybe I can now generate B-roll for this new lesson. So I just invoke this master coordination skill, and it just onboards that same session into that same project in order to have them on the same page. So that's one thing that I do. I also have this master generation skill, which I shared as part of the rubric generations tab. And this just gives all of the knowledge to our agents on how to use Nano Banana 2, Nano Banana Pro, and so on and so forth. And so if I ever need to add things to it, like CDance 2.0, GPT Image 2, yeah, like this one, GPT Image 2, this was recently added by my agents here, then I know that this master generation skill is that. So you can employ a similar sort of naming convention, because what I find is usually it is much better to manage your own context for you to understand and switch between sessions and tabs versus you managing your files and versus you managing your agents. And so that is the reason why I sometimes say that, like, if you were to quiz me what these skills do, I probably can give you a vague answer, but I can't tell you what's in them, very like line by line, obviously. And the reason why is because it is almost always a better use of your time to just have your agents refine them after the fact versus you having to go through these skills line by line and improve them as you go. Same with the locations, right? So if somehow you're able to not find your skills in your root user folder or where to put them in your workspace, because if you give your Claude Code enough permissions anyway, it'll be able to find all of those files for you from anywhere in your computer. Then it almost doesn't matter often where to put your skills or your memory files and such. Now, if there's something that you feel is frustrating for you for Claude Code because it's not able to recall something, then again, one of the best ways that you can do in order to fix that is to talk to it, give it a direction to fix itself, because under the hood, these are all just text files, right? And yeah, the whole piece around having too many skills, I think that's fine personally, because if you have like a your own techniques like these where you have that master prefix, then you'll be able to quickly just recall what it is that you usually use, and you'll be able to give that context to your agent, so that you are always on the same page. And one of the highest delta things that I think you can do to make agents smarter is at the end of every session, just ask what you can improve with it. Like usually, I just ask it like via natural language, or even just prompt it with just this literally one line. And if it gives me like a long list, I sometimes ask it to number those bullets, and so that I can just riff off on it and use like Aqua or Whisper Flow in order to go line by line. But usually it gives me like a really good sort of base to approve or improve each of these skills. In fact, this calibrate skill that I mentioned earlier, this is something that I guess made like a week ago, exactly for that, so that in session, if I have like a particular session that I want to sort of capture the learnings again, then I just invoke this skill, and it auto gives me like a good list of improvements to have. So if you need this skill, I'll share this after the call, but honestly, this is not that complex. Like I just ask like Robo, like one of my agents, to make this for me with the right spec, and it just outlines all of those steps based on our conversation. So yeah, so I think that is like a really good way for you to make your agents smarter. And obviously, you don't have to replicate. In one of the videos, I shared that I employ like a 6 agent setup. And again, I mentioned that it's more to manage my own context, because if I have like 10 windows at a time open, then sometimes I don't remember like which one I've been working on. And just to give you guys sort of a preview, I've even come to the point where, okay, like this one, because it's orange, I know that it is content. But if I go to like this other sort of profile in my IDE, and this is with Como, like you can see like it is in green, because I want to know that when I'm looking at a green screen or a green IDE, that I'm working on community stuff like courses and such. And in case you don't know how to do that, basically, if you are in anti-gravity, if you go to file and go to new window with profile, you can actually create a new profile here that will show the anti-gravity setup again for you. And then if you have a new profile like this one, like for example, development for Devo is like blue, which is pretty cool. You can just change the theme of this, and then you'll be able to manage your own context better, especially if you're finding that you are waiting for one agent to do something. Been working for 10 minutes, maybe I work on something else first, which is pretty cool. But there, so now you have the mental model. I think that foundational piece is very useful, especially as we go to further sort of modules and tips on how to work with these agents. Um, there you go. Any other questions? I think there's a couple more in the chat.
I did, and I also had a follow up kind of on what you were showing for your
Yeah, go
agents.
ahead, Don.
For the agents that you had in the you were showing your anti gravity, your actual folder hierarchy. Do you have a Claude MD for each agent, and then one for all agents, and they both run the Claude MD?
Correct,
Is that
correct. So
okay?
I will see if I can find that for you. So earlier on, when I first set up Claude Code and my whole workspace, I think I mentioned this in the sort of Claude Claw video, where if I go to agents, this is basically each of the specific workspaces for each of my agents. And again, you don't have to do this, but the reason why I have like a specific claw.md. So to answer your question, yes, I have a specific claw.md for each of these. The reason why is number one, because I sort of educate in the space, I wanted to still have that OpenClaw architecture setup available to me, even if I'm not using OpenClaw anymore. And so that's the reason why I have this claw.md have a soul.md just to define the characteristics of this particular agent. And number two, it also helps sort of these workspaces, pretty much these agents, have the context of what their role is in this whole business, right? So, for example, this Asto, this assistant agent, and you can see like I named them like really familiar names instead of human names that are harder for me to remember what they actually do. But Asto, I know, is my assistant. So it does like simple crons, like if I wanted to search for like a concert ticket to see if there's like an availability already, it's the one handling it. If it gives me like I think it's the one that gives me my daily AI briefing as well, things like that. And then obviously Bizo is for the business stuff, community development, and education. Um, I have specific Claude.mds for them. Again, you don't have to if you don't need to, but I just found that having them have like separate identities and even system instructions does help. Like it does help, especially if like the future of these agents are probably going to get more personified as we go. Like ChatGPT, OpenAI just released their own sort of OpenAI agents with their own sort of icons, actually. So let me see if I can find those. But I think to answer your question, Don, it's basically a specific Claude.md for each of them. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll see if I can share that in the community. But I think just today, OpenAI just released their own set of sort of Claude managed agents, but for ChatGPT. Cool. So I think came to use GOT for supervision. GPT. So I think this is Edward.
Hello. I couldn't find the how to raise a hand here. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, go ahead, Umid.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm just question about the. Let's say if we have multiple projects. For example, in our case, we develop applications and we use cloud, and we have, let's say, different projects. How we manage the different projects in this? If we have agents, let's say in company level, we have agents, uh, and we have a multiple projects. Should we duplicate each of these steps for each project, or is there any way to, how to say, easy to manage?
Yeah. So the sort of short answer to that is so obviously it highly depends on the company itself and also who the particular sort of business sectors are who are using the agents. If you're mostly dealing with like developer teams, then what Anthropic is actually doing, and probably because they've been into this longer than anyone has, most people, they actually put their whole workspace, like the files you see here, they have like a GitHub repo that is shared across the organization. And then whenever they update skills, they just push a commit to update those skills for the wider organization. And so with that setup, you can imagine how everyone, like with their own laptops and devices, can just pull from that repo and update their skills. At least for me, what I found, because I try to sort of emulate and see how fast we can arrive to that setup where we can have these agents work for us autonomously and across multiple contexts. This master coordination skill, the one that I showed earlier, what that actually does, and again, I'll talk more about this probably in the sort of next module. What that does under the hood for me is it creates projects which are, I guess it's here under shared. Again, I'm not the master of my own folders in here, but whenever like I work on a particular project, let's say earlier I was having Claude Code write for me like a good skill and sort of um, um, writing skill, a paradigm for writing my newsletters for Substack. And what it does here is it just auto writes the context. It auto writes a few session logs so that, let's say, if I need to start up a new session, and you can imagine if a new person, like if an employee of mine wants to start up a new session and this is shared, I can just ask it to onboard itself to the Substack newsletter. It'll be able to find it in its project. and even has sometimes these IDs, which I've picked up from my product management days. If you have this ID, then you'll be able to identify even that the 313 project is this particular one. Then all the files in this particular project will go here. So you can see I was testing out Higgsfield Playwright earlier. I asked Claude Code to create a script that opens up the Playwright browser so that I can show Higgsfield being automated. And so it wrote this down for me. And if I need to have like multiple sessions running, then I can just open up a session. I can actually try and show it right now. So for example, I'll just say, use the master coordination skill and onboard yourself to Substack newsletter project. Couple of typos there, but I think Opus can handle it. And yeah, basically, because again, back to the sort of fundamentals earlier, it has knowledge of the description of this skill. So it was able to find that pretty well. And because that skill talks about how to onboard itself to that shared projects folder that it knows, right? So it was able to do this bash command, basically check that shared projects folder that we were looking at earlier. And because I asked it to do the newsletter project, again, you don't need to quote this because it can pretty much find it, then it's able to go through that, find the specific folder, read through it, and even identify what it is and where we are in the process. So let's say if I want to make like visuals for this or write like a new newsletter, then I can do it here. Or if I want to sort of do 2 sessions at a time because I want to monitor 2 Claude Code sessions at a time, then I can just do the same thing to this session and actually work on that same project and have them do things in parallel. So that's sort of a preview on how you can manage these things on a multi-agent level. Basically, the short answer is like, if you can see how both of these can run at the same time, then you can also imagine how multiple people across the organization runs at the same time. The only sort of question that you have at that point is how you're going to share the files, which are now living in your computer, pretty much.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, looks great. Thank you.
Cool. No worries. I think there's a couple more questions. Edward, I'm not sure GPT for supervision. Do you mean like OpenAI's GPT? Maybe you can type in the chat and I'll come back to that. But I did want to mention, I think MaxSense has a good question around why I keep using File AI and WaveSpeed against Key. Look, I really like Key because I think we're one of the first ones who popularized them because they're really cheap. They're probably unparalleled in terms of the cheapness. But often I find that their models, because probably there's more demand because they're cheaper, is that sometimes they are returning a lot of status 500s, so a lot of errors, which especially back in N8N, that's really frustrating, right? Because you get a lot of errors. And similar with Claude Code, like you end up using more tokens because it needs to pull and retry a lot. So from what I found, the sort of cent differential between File AI and Key AI, because it's not like materially that expensive unless you're generating 1,000 videos at a time. Usually, File AI and WaveSpeed is more reliable, and you get results faster, which matters a lot when you're doing things in production.
So between the 3 models, which ones like would you qualify as like your first one, second one, and then like third one, like File AI, WaveSpeed, and then Key, or?
Yeah, if I were to force rank them, usually we do WaveSpeed as the number 1 because they have a good balance of reliability, and I think a lot of their models are slightly cheaper than Fal. Mostly they're line priced, but I think some of their more bespoke models, like I think Infinitalk, for the longest time, Infinitalk was just in WaveSpeed and Key. And then the second one is probably, I'm not sure if it depends what matters to you, but I'll probably put Fal AI for me personally a second because reliability matters more to me than the savings on the cost. And then the third one is Key because of the cost component, especially if you're trying to bulk generate things and you can just have it sort of running in the background, I guess, then that might be the third thing. Okay. And then obviously there's a tail end of other ones, right? Like Mu API, Pi API, and there's tons more that are probably we haven't mentioned before.
Got it. Thank you.
No worries.
So I can add one more thing here. As I know, recently OpenRouter also start adding the video and image models. I hope they are planning to add as a same with Fal AI, like Before they already have
Interesting.
a LLM. Now they have video models, image models.
That's so interesting, right? Like 11 Labs did the same thing, where versus before they were just doing voice. I think they have image and videos in there. So yeah, I didn't know that. So that's a good tip, Umid. So if you're using Open Router, which used to be just a lot of the text models,
Yeah.
then I guess you can now invoke some of the generative models in there. Can these sub agents? So I'm just going through the rest of the so that before we end, I go through them because I have time. Can these agents run sub agents? Yes. So I'll cover this more in a bit. But essentially, the difference between sort of, let's say you are working in multiple Claude Code sessions, anti-gravity sessions. Usually, I like talking to them in like one chat. When I say them, like I guess I'm sort of personifying these guys. But it's nice to just have that whole context in there. But if, for example, like I think, yeah, this one, it did spawn some sub agents, and the benefit of that is that you can continue talking to them while that sub agent is happening. So, for example, these ones, I was basically asking it to create HTML slides, which is part of the piece that I was doing earlier. And because I want to continue conversing with it, it basically did sort of created these different slides by spawning sub agents. So it did one for Claude, this one for Figma, this one for Wise, and maybe if I can open those for me, what it basically did here is it spawned like this subagent, which you can see. And while that is happening, obviously this is just a test, so it's not a long running task. But if it's like a long running task, then you can continue conversing with it while these files are making, so are being created rather. So for example, like you can imagine like these ones, like these sort of HTML slides, they took a long time to create because it researched the design system behind these brands, and I had it also think of like the text to put into these slides, right? But because they are all done by sub agents, I was able to continue conversing with that agent while these are happening under the hood. So it's just a nice way to do it if in case you want something done in the background. But the only sort of issue with that is you can't always, it's much harder to inspect their sort of thinking patterns and inspect what they're doing, because once you invoke a sub agent, then you'll be able to get their output once they're done, instead of talking to them, and you'll be able to really see what the differentials are as you work with them. Cool, right? So yeah, actually Ricardo also gave a really good response in there.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm normally like just burning through things. My mind moves a mile a minute, and I can't wait for an agent to do its job before I need to do the next thing.
Yeah.
So I have the sub agents, and I encourage the sub agents to, I have my agents, and I encourage them to call sub agents. I do restrict my agents into what they can do, and they sub agents use the same rules as the agents that call them. So I try to be very, structured and security oriented around each agent. But the reality is, like, I can't wait until I'm trying to do the next thing while
I
it's
know. Yeah.
doing tool calling and figuring out in the background. So I'm like, spin up a sub agent, like do something else so that I can just keep it moving. But
Exactly.
I had put there that I use Discord a lot. I'm fine in IDEs. I use Zed. I use Codex. Like, I like using the tools, but I find myself going back to Discord so much because in Discord
Mm,
you have the separate project channels. I have the separate client channels. I have my personal channels. I have operations channels. I have a ton of channels. And if I think of something, I just drop it in the channel, and the agent can go back. And then I can, when I'm in front of the computer, I can work on it there, and we can go back and forth. But you're allowed to, like, it's really easy to see your project separated out, your client separated out, and, you know, deal with it that way in Discord. If you're
mhm,
someone that's like finding Telegram as being a little bit restrictive, I know that they have Telegram channels, but I couldn't
mhm.
get the same functionality out of it as I could with Discord. I just felt Discord was so much easier to jump around channels and add voice notes and add text and upload info and share markdown. So, I try and tell people, like, if you're the kind of person that, like, your mind is everywhere, I need to do 10 things at a time, like, Discord for me seems to be the best route.
Yep, definitely. I think Discord is more flexible versus Telegram, and yeah, I echo the same. Like before, I was thinking, oh, OpenClaw seems nice, and it seems like it's just going to be a toy, or is this going to be like a major part of my workflow? But I've been in countless scenario, well, not countless, but a couple of scenarios where like I'm outside and an idea pops up, and I wish I have like an easy way to access Cloud Code, which you can do via the app, but it's just so much more natural for me to open Telegram and just give that sort of thought bubble to the agent. And because I have this whole system set up, then it's able to log it to my weekly tasks, or even spin up like what I showed earlier. I want to feature, for example, HeyGen in like a feature video. Then it can do that whole research and have that project ready for me by the time that I get back, right? And then since these agents are like what I mentioned earlier, I do think that context switching is going to be the skill of the decade. Because if you have like an agent doing things for 10 minutes, it's just natural for you because you're not just going to stare at your screen, right, and wait for it to finish. You're going to jump to a next session and you're going to do something else, maybe in that same project. But often I find that I do like another second project concurrently. And so that whole piece around context switching, that I want to jump from project X to project Y when I talk to these agents, seems to be the muscle that is being developed if you want to work with these agents more efficiently. Um, yeah. So yeah, I think we are at time. So what I will do is I will make sure to have this recording up. I think we can share the slides for sure because I think these are sort of good material for everyone to brush up on. What I hope is, even after like a few months, it's kind of hard, right? Because with AI, like you never know what gets released next week. But I think a lot of what we covered today, because we've set it to be foundations, hopefully it will stand the test of time, however many months that means in AI terms. But I think if you have these foundations in place, then you'll have sort of that intimidation factor or that AI psychosis that I've been hearing be a bit more reduced. So I will hope this was a good session for everyone here, and I'll see you guys on the next one. We'll have more to cover for the succeeding modules.